July 1943 Kursk. 6,000 tanks, 2 million soldiers. The largest tank battle in history ignites. At Prokhorovka, 1,200 tanks clash at point-blank range. Steel burns, earth shakes, and Hitler's final eastern gamble collapses. Kursk, the moment the Red Army seized the war's momentum, forever changing World War II. The summer sun burned across the endless wheat fields of western Russia, turning the stalks a harsh gold under a cloudless July sky. Beneath that deceptive calm, the earth trembled with the low, constant growl of engines. The sound was like distant thunder, ominous and unbroken, heralding a storm made not of rain, but of steel and fire. This was Kursk in 1943, where the largest armored confrontation in human history was about to unfold. More than 2 million soldiers, over 6,000 tanks, and thousands of aircraft gathered for a collision so immense it would echo through the remainder of the Second World War. It was, in every sense, a clash of titans. 6 months earlier, Germany had suffered a devastating defeat at Stalingrad. The once unstoppable Wehrmacht had been forced into retreat, and the myth of invincibility surrounding Adolf Hitler's armies had cracked. Yet the Führer remained determined to reclaim the initiative. In the spring of 1943, he turned his gaze toward a bulge in the Soviet front line near the city of Kursk, salient nearly 200 kilometers wide and 150 kilometers deep. To Hitler and his generals, it looked like an irresistible target. The plan, code-named Operation Citadel, called for a classic pincer attack. From the north, General Walter Model's Ninth Army would drive southward. From the south, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's 4th Panzer Army would push north. Their goal, to encircle the Soviet forces in the salient and destroy them, delivering a blow so severe it would force Joseph Stalin to sue for peace. But Stalin's commanders were not blind to the danger. Soviet intelligence, aided by British codebreakers and a well-placed spy ring in Switzerland, learned of the German plan weeks before the first shot was fired. Rather than launching a premature offensive, the Red Army's chief strategist, Georgy Zhukov, convinced Stalin to wait. They would build defenses in depth, bleed the Germans white, and then counterattack. What followed was one of the most formidable defensive preparations ever undertaken. Across the Kursk salient, Soviet engineers dug more than 5,000 kilometers of trenches and laid nearly 2 million mines. They built 8 defensive belts, each bristling with anti-tank guns, barbed wire, and hidden artillery. Every village became a fortress, every road a trap. By early July, Kursk was not merely a city. It was a steel labyrinth designed to break the Wehrmacht's back. Both sides understood that Kursk would be decided by machines as much as men. For the Germans, this was to be the proving ground for their newest and most formidable weapons. Rolling toward the salient were more than 2,700 tanks, including the fearsome Tiger I, with its thick armor and an 88mm gun capable of killing a Soviet T-34 at over a mile. Alongside them rumbled the sleek Panther, a cutting-edge design meant to dominate the battlefield, and the massive Ferdinand tank destroyers, armored fortresses bristling with heavy cannons. Facing them was an even larger Soviet armored force, over 3,300 tanks, the majority the rugged and reliable T-34. Though less heavily armed than the Tiger or Panther, the T-34 excelled in speed, maneuverability, and sheer numbers. The Soviets also deployed the newer T-34 85th variants and swarms of self-propelled guns and anti-tank units. Above the battlefield, the skies would be contested by more than 4,000 aircraft. German Messerschmitts and Stukas against Soviet Yakovlevs and Il-2 Sturmovix. This was not merely a clash of armies. It was an industrial duel, a confrontation between the engineering might of Nazi Germany and the relentless production power of the Soviet Union. Every tank, every plane was a testament to the factories and workers far behind the lines. feeding a war of attrition where steel and oil were as decisive as courage and strategy. At dawn on July 5, 1943, the quiet fields of Kursk erupted. German artillery opened with a deafening barrage, followed by waves of Luftwaffe bombers streaking across the pale sky. Their goal was simple: shatter Soviet defenses, sow panic, and carve a path for the advancing panzers. Yet the Red Army had anticipated this exact assault. Soviet anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with flak, and their own air force quickly engaged. The Luftwaffe failed to win air superiority, and the Germans were forced to fight for every inch of ground. From the north, Model's 9th Army struck first. His divisions, packed with Tigers and Ferdinands, slammed into a wall of mines and entrenched guns. Soviet soldiers fought from concealed positions, allowing the first German waves to pass before springing ambushes that left burning hulks of steel across the fields. Progress measured in meters came at a staggering cost. Meanwhile, in the south, Manstein's 4th Panzer Army advanced with slightly greater success. The terrain favored maneuver, and his Panthers sliced through the outer defenses. But even here, every gain was purchased in blood and metal. Soviet engineers detonated mines beneath advancing tanks, and artillery rained down relentlessly. By the third day, German spearheads had penetrated only a fraction of their intended depth, while casualties mounted on both sides. Despite the ferocity of the German assault, the Soviet defensive belts held. Every time the Wehrmacht broke through one line, another waited behind it, equally fortified and deadly. Soviet commanders rotated reserves efficiently, ensuring that fresh troops always filled the trenches. The minefields alone inflicted catastrophic losses. Thousands of German tanks and vehicles were damaged or destroyed before even engaging the main Red Army forces. The battlefield became a nightmare of smoke, fire, and twisted metal. Tank crews fought in suffocating heat, their ears ringing from the roar of cannons and the hiss of incoming shells. Soldiers waded through mudslick with oil and blood. Above, the sky was a swirling chaos of dogfights and tracer fire. Kursk was no longer a place of wheat and sunlight. It was a crucible of steel where life and death were decided in seconds. By mid-July 1943, the German advance was grinding forward, but losing momentum. Supply lines stretched thin, and every kilometer cost rivers of fuel and blood. Then came the 12th of July, the day that would define the entire campaign. Near a small railway station named Prokhorovka, the largest tank engagement in recorded history erupted. At dawn, the earth shook beneath more than 1,200 armored vehicles converging on a front barely a few kilometers wide. Soviet General Pavel Rotnestrov hurled the 5th Guards Tank Army against the spearhead of the German the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Dust, clouds and smoke cloaked the battlefield as engines roared like an unending thunderstorm. Germans relied on their fearsome Tigers and Panthers, designed to kill at long range. But the Red Army refused to fight on German terms. T-34 crews closed the distance as fast as their engines allowed, swarming in tight formations. At ranges of only a few dozen meters, the Tigers' long-range advantage vanished. The clash was apocalyptic. Tank barrels fired point-blank. Metal screamed as shells punched through armor. Flames erupted from shattered hulks, sending black columns into the sky. Men fought inside boiling steel coffins, the heat and smoke choking any sense of daylight. By nightfall, the field around Prokhorovka was a graveyard of twisted wreckage. Neither side achieved a clear tactical victory, but the Germans had lost the initiative. Their best armored divisions were mauled, their momentum broken. For the first time, Hitler's vaunted Panzer Corps had been stopped dead in a head-on confrontation. Even as Prokhorovka raged, events elsewhere sealed Germany's fate. On July 10th, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Sicily, opening a new front in the Mediterranean. Faced with this unexpected invasion and fearing a collapse in Italy, Hitler ordered precious divisions to shift south. What began as a carefully planned offensive in Russia was suddenly starved of reserves and air support. Soviet commanders, sensing weakness, unleashed massive counterattacks across the northern and southern flanks of the salient. Zhukov and Rokossovsky struck like hammers, turning the German drive into a desperate retreat. By early August, the Wehrmacht was pushed back to its starting positions, leaving behind smoking wrecks and tens of thousands of dead. The numbers told a grim story. Germany suffered roughly 200,000 casualties, with more than 700 tanks and hundreds of aircraft lost. The Red Army's losses were even higher perhaps: 250,000 soldiers and over 1,500 tanks. But the difference was strategic. The Soviet Union could replace its losses. Germany could not. The Battle of Kursk marked the last major offensive Nazi Germany would ever launch on the Eastern Front. From this point forward, the Red Army dictated the pace of the war. The months that followed saw Soviet forces drive westward in relentless waves, liberating Smolensk, retaking Kiev, and eventually crossing into Eastern Europe. For Hitler, Kursk was a shattering blow to morale and prestige. The myth of the unstoppable Wehrmacht, already cracked at Stalingrad, now lay in pieces. German industry struggled to replace destroyed armor, while the Allies tightened their grip on multiple fronts. For the Soviet Union, Kursk was more than a battlefield victory. It was a triumph of intelligence, engineering, and endurance. The intricate defenses, the deep minefields, and the disciplined rotation of troops had proved decisive. Soldiers who survived spoke of the battle as a crucible where the Red Army's spirit was hardened for the long road to Berlin. When the smoke finally cleared, the plains around Kursk were unrecognizable. Fields of wheat had become oceans of charred metal. Rusting carcasses of Tigers and T-34s lay side by side, silent memorials to the ferocity of the clash. Villages were reduced to rubble, their earth scorched and blackened. But within that devastation lay a pivot in world history. Kursk demonstrated that Nazi Germany could no longer seize the initiative in the East. From July 1943 onward, the question was not if the Red Army would reach Berlin, but when. The Battle of Kursk remains the largest tank battle ever fought, a confrontation where more than 2 million soldiers and thousands of armored vehicles met in a storm of fire and steel. It was the ultimate clash of the titans, a struggle not only of armies and machines, but of endurance, strategy, and industrial will. As the sun set over the silent wrecks and the smoke drifted toward a blood-red horizon, the world had changed. The Third Reich had taken its last great gamble in the East and lost. From those scorched fields, the Red Army began its long, unstoppable march westward, carrying with it the fate of Europe and the final doom of Hitler's empire.